Morning.
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 Okay. All right. Well, this morning we're going to talk about Passover, which is coming up in about 10 days. So, first of all, I guess I just want to pause and say thank you all for coming in this morning. We're living in crazy times, and this is a good way to connect, the best way we have right now, and to get together. So that's it's a great way to have community, and I appreciate having everybody here. So during the year, that's your internet connection is unstable. I just got a message. That's weird. More Jews observe the first night of Passover, the special meal called the Seder, than pretty much any other home ritual. Even secular Jews in Israel often do a Passover Seder of some kind. And so it's a pretty important holiday, and it's a way for everybody to get together. One of the things I mentioned in the Lunch and Learn was that the idea of a large group of people coming together for a meal on the first night of Passover was kind of baked into the program, so to speak, right from the Bible. When it first describes the first Seder in Egypt, the Israelites are told to sacrifice a Passover lamb. The blood of the lamb was used to put on the doorposts of the house. You probably know the story, so that the angel of death would pass over the houses of the Israelites, whose doors were marked, when it went to kill the firstborn of all the Egyptians. And so, but the Bible says that if you're supposed to eat that lamb roasted, and you're supposed to finish it that night, you can't leave any of it over until the morning. And you can imagine that a lamb is a lot of meat. One whole lamb is a lot of meat. And normally one family would not be able to eat all of that meat. So then the Bible says, if that is too much meat for you, then join together with a couple other families and share the one lamb. So nothing goes to waste. You're going to eat, make sure there'll be enough food for everybody, but also none of the meat will go to waste. So the idea of inviting other families to your home to celebrate the Passover meal is already mentioned right at the time of the first Exodus, the first Passover. And so, so normally it's a big meal. There's a lot of people at the table, family, extended family, friends of family. It's usually a lot of cooking. There's a lot of dishes, a lot of courses. And yeah, there was an internet lapse there, I think, huh? Anyway, it's normally when families would come together, large groups, and this year we're not going to be doing that. This year, we're following the guidelines of the health administration officials, and we're recommending that just a nuclear family, the people who normally live in the house, have the Seder meal in their home. As a result of that, a lot of even Orthodox, there's some liberal Orthodox, Sephardic Orthodox rabbis who have issued a legal responsa, a legal opinion. We're a religion of laws, so you have to have a legal opinion. So they've issued a legal opinion that says it's okay to Zoom your Seder with other people outside of your house. And that way you can get together through the Ethernet, if not physically together. They put a lot of conditions on how you can set that up because they don't want to use electricity. They don't want to violate other rules, but they at least created this leniency of using Zoom to connect with other people for this Passover meal because it's so important to have a large group of people together. So Beth Yeshurun is going to be doing Zoom Seders. I'm doing one the first night, which I hope everybody here will attend. It'll be 6:30. Um, the information is on our website. And we'll have our Passover Haggadah here. We'll have a whole Seder plate. And you can participate via Zoom. We'll have a downloadable Haggadah for you to use, which we'll post on our website. Should be finished in the next couple of days. It's going to be, by the way, largely based on A Night to Remember, which is one of the Haggadahs that are available. The publisher of that Haggadah, it's called A Night to Remember, has now, because of this crazy situation we're in, they are permitting people to download a PDF file of the entire Haggadah for use at home. So if you'd like to, I think the information about that is also on our website. You can download the entire Haggadah, but we're going to be using selected pages, and I'll make a separate PDF file of that. Any questions so far? So that's for the Seder. It's really an important holiday to celebrate, and I want everybody to have that experience.
I'll be there.
Terrific.
Rabbi Morgan, I just want to point out in the chat, I put the link to today's lesson plan, but I also put the link to the Passover site on our website that's got all different kinds of resources, including the sign up for the Seders.
Terrific. Yeah, that's Jennifer Rosenzweig, our program director. She's been working with Ashley, our publicity manager. Ashley has really done an amazing job putting together a Passover page for us, and it's all new, just brand new, with all the resources there. So Jennifer has posted a link to that, and that information is really helpful. Among other things, there's I think one of the handouts I gave out last week was the list of Passover links, and that's now posted on that page also. Okay, so let's, with all that in mind, let's go to the handout, the main handout. So let me do that on my Facebook page here. No, that's the wrong one. So let's go to, there we go. Okay, and okay, can you see this is is the handout showing?
Yes.
It's showing the website resources for Passover and the
really?
Seder. Yeah,
Oh,
I think you want the other one.
Not showing the invitation to Judaism one?
No.
Okay, so stop share and try again.
Sorry, I was looking at the one that she sent in the chat.
Video, yeah, video settings. Yeah, so that's interesting. I thought that within one software program you could switch between them. Okay, now you got it?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, so so let's start by, so the resources up here, the reading list, if you there's articles in the Joseph Telushkin book, Jewish Literacy. And so you can look up those articles, the Robinson book, and the handouts. So why is this holiday so important? One of the things that Jewish people say over and over again is that we're reminded that we were slaves in Egypt. And so, stop sharing. Okay, so we were slaves in Egypt. And why is that important? Because it reminds us to look after the people who are the disenfranchised, the downtrodden, the poor, the foreigners. Because of our historical experience of being slaves in Egypt, we know what it's like to be treated as the underclass, the outsider, the poor. And so that's like such a fundamental principle. It's repeated over and over again in Jewish sources. So the fact that we were slaves in Egypt is kind of like an essential part of our understanding of who we are, and then also how we should treat people in the world today. And the holiday that is designed specifically to remember that experience, of course, is Passover. Having said that, the idea that we were slaves in Egypt is repeated in other holidays as well. So every Friday night at Kiddush, when we say the blessing over the wine. We remind ourselves that we were slaves in Egypt because taking one day off a week is something that only free people can do. So every week we're reminding ourselves that we were slaves in Egypt. So every Shabbat reminds us of that. The Sukkot, the festival of Sukkot, the Feast of Booths, reminds us of the wandering in the desert, right? So again, reminds us of that formative experience of the Jewish people. And of course, the holiday of Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks, reminds us of getting the Ten Commandments at Mount Sinai. But Passover, the main emphasis is being slaves in Egypt and then becoming free people and getting out of Egypt. And so, so that's what the holiday is about and why it becomes so important for us to remember and to commemorate. The holiday is 7 days long, at least in Israel. Originally in the Bible, it's a 7-day holiday. And so if the first day is the Exodus, the leaving from Egypt, why is it a 7-day holiday? And the answer is that according to tradition, the 7th day was the day we crossed the Red Sea, or the Sea of Reeds, right? And the Egyptian army is drowned, and we're finally free. Our freedom really wasn't completely free until the army is destroyed. Because until the Egyptian army is destroyed, the Pharaoh could have just sent his army out to conquer us and take us back as prisoners. So it wasn't until the army is destroyed that we're really a free people, and that happens at the Sea of Reeds, or the Red Sea. Big scholarly debate about what to call it, by the way, whether it should be called the Red Sea or the Sea of Reeds. Almost every scholar will agree that whatever you call it, the place that we're talking about is the Red Sea, what's called the Red Sea today. In any case, that's so that's why it's a 7-day holiday. And as I mentioned before, if you're living outside of Israel, we add an extra day to each of the holidays. So outside of Israel, there's 8 days of Passover. And because we add an extra day, we have 2 nights of Seder, the first night and the second night. In the Reform movement, where they don't add the extra day, they only have 1 night of Seder, and the holiday is only 7 days long. So number 2 here is that the American revolutionaries saw this story as a paradigm for their experience as well. In fact, Benjamin Franklin wanted to make the national seal of the United States of America a scene of the Israelites crossing the Red Sea. And of course, they saw the Red Sea in their story was the Atlantic Ocean. The Pharaoh was King George III, right? And they were declaring independence and freedom from what they considered slavery and tyranny, not from Pharaoh, but from King George in England. And so they saw this as a paradigm. And of course, the African Americans in this country also saw this as a paradigm, which is why they, among other songs, they sang a song about Go Down Moses, which is an African American spiritual song where they express their desire for freedom from slavery here in this country, based on the same paradigm of the Israelites getting free. So this story has been important to not just the Jews, but to other people as well. What else does it? It also commemorates or recognizes God's presence in the history of the Jewish people, God's redemption of the Jewish people. And we kind of discussed the problem of seeing God's presence in history in the world when we talked about theology, right? What role does God have in changing the course of history? And if God has a role in changing the course of history, why did he allow the Holocaust to happen? That whole discussion aside, which was a separate topic we discussed, it is pretty remarkable that the Jewish people have survived 3,800 years of history. That's a long time for a small group of people to continue to exist and even thrive and preserve our history and identity. So however you understand God's role in history, I personally think it's pretty miraculous that we're still here, and there must be something going on to support that. So somehow God has had a role, I believe, in our history, and this is sort of the paradigm moment of God's role in our history when he rescued us from slavery in Egypt. So now we're going to talk about the specific rules of Passover. So besides keeping kosher, which I guess we talked about in an earlier session, it was everything before the coronavirus now is like, seems like ancient history. So I think it was only in January we talked about kashrut, generally what is kosher, what is not kosher. So one of the main areas of law, Jewish law, that are special about Passover relate to what is kosher and what is not kosher for Passover. So in addition to the normal laws of kashrut, we have the addition that we can't have anything that is not kosher for Passover. So here you have the commandment is not to eat chametz. Chametz is the word for leavened bread, and not to have it in your homes. It has to be completely cleaned out of your homes, and not to benefit from chametz. So you can't sell bread during Passover. Even if you're not eating it and it's not in your home, you're not allowed to derive any benefit from chametz. Just an example of that, there was a, when I was living in Los Angeles, there was a kosher Dunkin' Donuts. It was a Dunkin' Donuts store that was supervised as being kosher. And during Passover, the owners, who were Jewish, had to sell it to non-Jews so that the store could remain open during Passover. Because had the Jews continued to own that store, they wouldn't have been able to get to sell donuts, because they'd be deriving a profit, a benefit from chametz. So kind of interesting. So that's, so there's three prohibitions about chametz: not to eat it, not to have it in your homes, and not to benefit from chametz. What is chametz? What is leavened? So this is really important. I didn't know this when I was a kid growing up, because my parents were Reformed Jews, so they didn't quite get the whole picture. We didn't have any bread in the house in our home, but we continued to eat breakfast cereals. And most breakfast cereals have grains in them, so we really shouldn't have been eating that, but that's another story. So what is chametz? Chametz is anything made from these 5 grains: wheat, barley, oats, spelt, and rye. Those 5 grains, if they're not treated properly, can become leavened. And by the same token, if you're careful with them, you can turn them into matzah, which is unleavened bread. Those are the only 5 grains that can become matzah, unleavened bread. So the same grains that can be used to make matzah are the ones that can become chametz and you can't have in the house. And so the general rule is, if you've got anything with these 5 ingredients, these 5 grains in them, and it wasn't made special for Passover, it's not kosher for Passover. And here's another important point. If you, a supermarket like Randall's, the Randall's at West Belford and Post Oak, sells matzah all year long, right? It's a box, it has these flat crackers in it, and they sell them all year long. But the boxes that they sell the rest of the year have in letters at the top, not really big letters, but letters, not for Passover. Why does it say not for Passover? Because it wasn't made special for Passover. It didn't necessarily follow the rules for Passover. So even though it's matzah, and even though it's made out of the 5 grains, it's considered chametz, and you can't eat it on Passover. Only the boxes of matzah that are made specially for Passover are kosher for Passover. So, so let's go back to this thing here. Okay, so so anything made out of the 5 grains. So what is the difference between chametz and matzah, since they're both made out of the same thing? Matzah is made by taking the flour from these 5 grains, mixing it with only water, just water and nothing else, mixing the dough, rolling it out flat, and sticking it in the oven. If from the time that water touches the flour till the time the flat rolled out dough is put into the oven is 18 minutes or less, if that time period is 18 minutes or less, it is considered matzah. If it takes you more than 18 minutes, then it's considered chametz. Why would it be considered leavened bread when it's clearly just flat? That's a good question. So partly you have to understand what I didn't know, and I'm not a chemist or a baker, but apparently sourdough bread is made by mixing flour and water and pretty much nothing else. And if you let it sit long enough, it starts to rise. Now, usually long enough is more than a day. And then what you do is it creates this yeasty dough, and because there's yeast in the air, so the yeast in the air mixes with the flour and water mixture and it becomes chametz. And then you usually, for sourdough bread, you take a pinch off and save it for later. And then you make your bread and you take the pinch, and that's called the starter mash. And you use that to make the next sourdough loaf, and it will rise faster. It won't take as long because the yeast is already activated in that pinch. But the point is that dough will naturally rise on its own. Doesn't need to have store-bought yeast put into it for it to rise, because there's yeast in the air that'll make it rise. For whatever reason, our ancestors said 18 minutes of rising is the maximum they would allow, even though it doesn't look like it's yeasty dough to us. So if it's more than 18 minutes, it's considered chametz. If it's less than 18 minutes, it's considered matzah. So now let's go back to the hand light. So that's 18 minutes with contact and water. So the rule only applies to these 5 grains, however. So it shouldn't apply to rice, corn, or any other kind of grain. However, in the 1100s, around the 1100s, in Ashkenazic countries, France, Germany, Jews started avoiding other kinds of things that were like these 5 grains. And those are called kitniot, from the Hebrew word katan, which means little. So these little things that looked like grains or acted like grains, they decided we're not going to eat those on Passover either. And so this is an Ashkenazic custom. It is not a Sephardic custom. The Jews of Spain did not observe this restriction. The early sources in the Ashkenazic world from France and Germany, the rabbis in France and Germany said, I don't know why these Jews are not eating these things. That's really stupid. It's a stupid custom. They're refraining from eating it. Nevertheless, Jews continue not to eat it, and now it's become a long-standing tradition for hundreds of years that Ashkenazic Jews don't eat corn, beans, lentils, rice, and other things that are like the 5 grains. I studied this topic when I was in rabbinical school with Rabbi David Golinkin in Israel. This Masorti opinion, that's the Jewish conservative movement in Israel. So originally in Israel, he wrote an opinion where he collected all the sources, and he said, this is indeed a stupid custom. By the way, that's a category in Jewish law, stupid custom. And what is a stupid custom? What does it mean? It means that you don't have to observe it. Even if it's been a long-standing custom, a stupid custom should be abandoned. And so Rabbi Golinkin said that's what their ancestors called it originally, so we should abandon this custom of not eating kitniot. He did add that in Israel, there's other reasons for not observing the commandment, because now Ashkenazic Jews and Sephardic Jews, Jews from the Sephardic countries and Jews from Ashkenazic countries are living all together in one area. And there were Sephardic rabbis who were certifying as kosher all kinds of foods that the Ashkenazic Jews couldn't eat. And this was creating a separation among people in the land of Israel over laws of kashrut. And Rabbi Golinkin said, this is also bad. We should have one standard. So since this is a stupid custom, Ashkenazic Jews should abandon it, and they should now eat kosher for Passover food that has these kitniot in them. Recently, the conservative movement in the United States adopted this opinion as well as a permission. It's not required, but you are able to eat kitniot if you would like. And my family has eaten kitniot since I studied this issue with Rabbi Golinkin 30 years ago. we decided that we were going to eat kitniot in our home, and we continued to do so. If you'd like to do that, on our website, we have the Sephardic list of kosher for Passover foods. And especially this year when foods are difficult, shopping is difficult, if you would like to take advantage of the leniencies of the Sephardic Jews, there's a whole list of ordinary foods that are kosher for Passover, and I encourage you to go ahead and eat them. People who choose to be Jewish, in my opinion, you're choosing to join the Jewish people, and you can also choose whether you want to follow Sephardic or Ashkenazic customs. So you can choose, you're going to follow the lenient opinion. In addition, if you're a conservative Jew, and everybody, I assume, is going to be converting with us here at Beth Yeshurun, so as a conservative Jew, even if you don't think of yourself as a Sephardic Jew, you can follow the opinion of our movement that says you can eat kitniot anyway. So, so I strongly recommend looking at that, that list. We also put up on our website 2 opinions about how to kosher your home. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. One from our movement's rabbis, and one from the Sephardic website. If you study it closely, you'll see the Sephardic rabbis are much more lenient about how to kosher your home. And so again, I personally am a very liberal, lenient rabbi, and I don't see why we need to make things more difficult than Orthodox rabbis are making things. So even though they're Sephardic rabbis, I actually agree with their logic also. I would follow the lenient opinions of the Sephardic rabbis. It's not just that they're more lenient, but I think their logic is also correct, without going into the details of that. Okay, so let's go back to the handout. So so we talked about kitniot. So you can't eat these things, and so then we have an extra problem with cooking them. So as we talked about with regular kosher, you have dairy pots and pans and meat pots and pans, if you're not vegetarian. And Jewish law requires you to have separate pots and pans for dairy and meat, because when you cook, let's say, a meat dish in a meat pot, and then you want to make a cream of mushroom soup and use the same pot, the flavor of the meat is supposedly coming out of the pot and into the cream of mushroom soup, and therefore you now have a non-kosher cream of mushroom soup because you've mixed meat and milk. So the same principles apply on Passover with respect to chametz and matzah. If you use the pots and pans that you use all year long to cook kosher for Passover food, the flavor of the chametz comes out of the pot and into the kosher for Passover food, and now it's not kosher for Passover. So pots and pans, dishes, etc., all have to be special for Passover. And that then entails, how do you kosher those pots and pans? And again, I would recommend following the Sephardic rabbis' opinion on that, because they're pretty lenient about how you go about doing that. Okay, so I guess I should talk about that a little bit. So when we talked about keeping kosher, one of the rules was you had to have heat in order to transfer the flavor. If it's cold, if the utensils are only used for cold food or food that's only like warm and not really hot, it doesn't absorb the flavor in the first place, and so it can't give the flavor up later. And so many of the utensils that we use are not used hot, and it's easy to kosher them. The Sephardic Jews say that hard plastic plates, and glass dishes and so on can just be washed with soap and water. That's an example of one of their leniencies. Okay, the first and last days of the festival are considered no work days. They're festival days, so like the Sabbath, you're not supposed to do work. And the days in between are still supposed to be chametz free. We won't deal with this. What if the Passover falls on Friday night? It's a little more complicated because your Seder meal takes place on Sabbath. And if the first day falls on Saturday night, it's also a little bit more complicated, but it's not this year, so we'll skip that part. Cleaning your house. The main thing to know about cleaning your house for Passover is that you really only have to clean for Passover, the areas that are used for making food or eating food, places where food normally comes. So the only place you really need to clean really is the kitchen, your dining room, your pantry. Those are the main areas where you want to be concerned about, is there any chametz in them? The rest of the house, you generally don't have to worry about. Many people see this as an opportunity to do spring cleaning. They clean their entire house. It's not really so necessary, unless you're like me. So I eat at my computer in the study, and I sometimes hide candy bars somewhere in the house. Crazy custom that I do. So I have to make sure I find all those places and deal with whatever chametz is in any of those places. But for the most part, you only have to clean the kitchen, the dining room, and the pantry. So the first thing is to clean everything, particularly the stovetop and the oven. Clean your dishwasher. One way to clean your dishwasher, by the way, usually you find places where the crud gets hard caked on. I've noticed that in the door to my dishwasher on the bottom, there's some area there that seems to have some crud, so that should be cleaned out anyway from time to time. Use a scrub sponge and whatever to clean those areas out. Clean the area where the traps are in the dishwasher, and then just run your dishwasher on a regular cycle, and that koshers the dishwasher for Passover, as far as we're concerned. Now you can use a dishwasher on Passover. To clean your stovetop, you obviously use whatever to take the stains and crud off the stovetop and out, and use regular in the oven, use cleaning to clean out the oven. And then you turn your burners on high, full blast for about 15-20 minutes. And the heat then koshers the grills on the stovetop. So now your stovetop is kosher. After cleaning out your oven, you turn your oven on high, the highest temperature for 30 minutes. And that cleans out the oven, that koshers the oven. Now it's kosher for Passover. Microwave. You wipe out the inside, make sure there's nothing, it's all clean on the inside. You put a glass in with water into the microwave, you turn it on for a few minutes, a couple minutes really, until the water boils and steams up inside. Now your microwave is kosher for Passover. Toasters are not easy to clean for Passover. It's hard to get toasters clean. If all you have is a toaster oven, you can clean your toaster oven out the same way you would clean out your oven. So clean it out as best as you can using scrub materials, whatever, and turn your toaster oven on for half an hour at high again, and that koshers your toaster oven. Silverware. So many people have separate silverware for Passover and separate dishes for Passover. We do. But we have a house where we have a place to store those things. If you're a student or you're getting started like I once was, you may not necessarily have the money to buy it or to store those extra things. So in that case, what you do is take a pot of water, put it on the stove, get it to boiling so the water is boiling, and dump your silverware into the pot. Let it come back to a boiling temperature again, and then as soon as it's boiling and the silverware is in it, the silverware is now kosher. Take it out. It's kosher for Passover. So your tabletops and countertops in your kitchen, just clean them. I used to cover those tabletops and countertops because there's an Ashkenazi custom about doing that. You could, if you want to, you can cover it with tinfoil. Some people do that. If you want to, another thing I used to do was I took a new plastic tablecloth and just taped the plastic tablecloth on top. So now the surface is the kosher for Passover service, the new tablecloth. And that's what I did for my tables and even the counters. But the truth is, you don't need to do that. Sephardic Jews don't do that. Some people take boiling water and pour the boiling water over the counters. That makes a big mess. And the Sephardic rabbis say it's not necessary because the counters generally don't get hot, so they can't absorb the flavor and then give the flavor up. So you don't really need to go through that process. You just need to clean your countertops. That logic makes sense to me, so that's what we do. In terms of the sinks, the same thing like you do koshering your sinks. Just clean your sinks out. We have the plastic tub liners that we put inside the sink. We have separate tub liners for Passover. They're not expensive. They're not too hard to store. So we have plastic tub liners and a separate plastic with, double sink. So the tub liner is on one side and a sort of the bottom grill or wire rack that we put at the bottom on the other side where the rinsing takes place. We have separate one for Passover and we use those. And we have separate drain pans for Passover. Again, those are plastic. They're not too expensive, so that's what we do. So that takes care of koshering. Is there any questions so far? Okay, so cleaning the house. So now you've cleaned your house, but you have a lot of food left over, let's say. Open boxes of cereal maybe, or flour, or other kinds of things, and you don't want to just throw it away. That's a waste. If they're open boxes or whatever, it's not likely going to be able to give it away. If you want to, you can. If there's a neighbor you want to give them to, you can give them to the neighbor. The food pantry will only take sealed boxes, and if you want to give extra sealed boxes of chametz to the food pantry, that's a nice thing to do. But another thing you can do is take all that not kosher for Passover food, set aside one cabinet in your house, and put all that stuff in that one cabinet, seal the cabinet with masking tape, mark it as not for Passover or chametz or leavened, whatever you want to mark it with, or even just a circle with an X in it on the masking tape. That's what we do. And you designate that as your not mine cabinet, not mine. Now what you're going to do is you go to our website, and there's a place where you can sell your chametz for Passover. So what is that? This was a legal fiction that was invented because we didn't want people to have to waste money and waste food. And so if you can't actually give your food away or give it to the poor or whatever, or you're poor and you don't want to give it away because you're going to need it when Passover is over, what you do is you set it aside, you sign a document, a written contract, or in this case, we do it electronically. You go to our website and say, I appoint Rabbi Strauss to be my agent to sell my chametz in my house. And it has your name and address. You can do this on our website. And then what Rabbi Strauss does is he takes the names and addresses of all the people who signed this contract. He takes the list. He has a contract which he's written out. It's a standard form contract, which said, and then he goes to a non-Jewish person, somebody probably who works at Beth Yeshurun who's not Jewish. And he says to this person, here I have a stack of documents authorizing me to sell their chametz to you. I'm going to sell you all the chametz represented by these documents. And I'm going to sell it to you for $1 million. Here's the requirements. You give me $1 today, and 8 days from now, you're going to give me the other $999,999. If you don't give me the money in 8 days, no problem. We'll tear up the contract. I'll give you the dollar back, and I'll take the chametz back and give it back to the original owners. This is called the sale of chametz. And so he takes the document, it's sold, and now the chametz in your home is not yours. It's considered belong to this person. And theoretically, they could come to your house and they could say, hey, I own this chametz, I'd like to collect it now. It never happens, but they could theoretically do that. So they own the chametz for the 8 days. At the end of the 8 days, Rabbi Strauss goes back to this person and says, well, do you want to pay the rest of the money? They usually say, no, I don't have $1 million. And he says, no problem. They tear up the contract. He gives them the dollar back, and the chametz reverts back to the original owners, meaning you. And so by about an hour after Passover is done, an hour after it gets dark outside, when the end of Passover, you can assume that the chametz is yours again, and you can open up those cabinets and use the food. And it's not considered in your possession. Remember, that was the key, that the chametz was not supposed to be in your possession during the holiday of Passover, right? Don't eat it, don't have it in your homes, not to benefit from it. It's not considered that it's yours in your home because of this sale of chametz. So when you clean your house, you're going to find a cabinet to store all your chametz in, seal it up, label it, and the rest of your house should only have kosher for Passover foods. And again, I recommend looking at the Sephardic opinion about what's kosher for Passover. By the way, Ashkenazic Jews say you're not supposed to eat kitniot, so you can't eat corn, beans, lentils, rice. But it's not considered chametz, so you don't have to sell it. You can't use it, you can't eat it, but you don't have to take it out of your house because it's not chametz. The Ashkenazic Jews didn't go that far. They just said you can't eat it on Passover. They didn't say you couldn't continue to possess it. So stuff with kitniot in it, you don't have to get rid of, but you just shouldn't use it, even if you're following that restriction. Okay, so we've cleaned the house, we've koshered the stove, the oven, and all the other stuff, and we've designated our chametz cabinet and set it aside and sealed it up. Now, the night before Passover, the night before the Seder, there is a sort of ceremony where you search for chametz. That's called bidikat chametz over here. Bidikat means searching for chametz. So the night before Passover, you go through the house to make sure you haven't missed anything. If you have kids, there's a fun little ritual that you do. There's a blessing you recite beforehand. It's in the beginning of most Passover Haggadahs. They give you the blessing you recite before you do the search for chametz. In the old days, you took a candle and a candle and a feather and a dustpan, and you'd go looking through the house in every little crevice with the candle to find whatever you might find in little corners and niches, and then you take the feather to scoop the chametz into the dustpan, and you get rid of it. So my opinion, again, is we don't live in the dark ages. We don't even live in the 1800s. We live in an age of electricity. So you don't need a candle. You can use a flashlight. Right? The idea was to have a narrow focused light so that you make sure you're looking and careful of every little nook and cranny. So use a flashlight. You don't need to use a feather. You can use a dust broom and a dustpan or whatever you want to use. But the idea is to search through your house, look through those drawers where I might have stashed my candy bars, right? Make sure you haven't missed anything. If you have kids, it's really a fun thing to do with the kids. And one thing that people do is they will specifically take pieces of bread and wrap it up and stash them in different places in the house so that the kids actually get to find something. You know, so you say, hey, we're going to go search for chametz, and the kids all get excited and they're looking for it. And every time they find one, you say, wow, you found another piece of chametz, right? And you get it all together. So we did this with our son Daniel when he was young, 4, 5, 6 years old, and it was a lot of fun. After a while, they kind of get bored by it. But so the main purpose of searching for chametz, though, is to actually find chametz, and you do want to kind of make a search, even as adults, just to make sure you haven't missed anything in the house. So that's that part. So we're searching for chametz, and that you do the night before. Oh, ma'ot chitin, I forgot about that. So that's coins for wheat. And there's a custom to collect money, that the Jewish community collects money for charity so that poor people can afford to buy boxes of matzah. And when you do your sale of chametz on our website, after you do the sale, it'll pop up and say, do you want to make a donation to the Moas Chitin Fund, which is the money for wheat? And so you can make a donation there, and the money will go to the Jewish Family Service that provides matzah and other Passover essentials to those people who can't afford it. So you can, that's what that is. There's a tradition of making a contribution for poor people so they can celebrate the holiday too. And then the morning before Passover is a fast day for firstborn males. The idea being that the angel of death passed over the Jewish homes, right? Only killed the firstborn of the Egyptians and not the firstborn of the Israelites. So because the Israelite male firstborns were spared, they have an obligation to fast on the day before Passover, the day when the angel of death would have been passing over the houses. So they fast on that day. But it's a minor fast. It's not considered a major deal. And so there was a leniency provided for these people, that there would be, somebody would be studying a tractate of Talmud. And when you complete a tractate of Talmud, there's usually a special meal to celebrate finishing a tractate. It's considered like a semi-joyous occasion. I finished a tractate, so we're going to have a celebration. We're going to eat something. And so on the morning after services, in the morning meal, of course, we're not getting together this year, but in a normal year, the chapel service, our weekday minyan, after they finish the regular service, the rabbi who's been studying the tractate will say, let's study the last paragraph of the tractate together. And after they read the last tractate, there's a special Kaddish that they recite and the blessing they recite. And then they're going to have a special meal to celebrate finishing a tractate. And anybody who was there when the tractate was finished is allowed to join the celebration. So firstborn males would typically go to that morning service so that they could participate in the completion of the tractate and then celebrate with the meal. Once you've eaten, you've broken the fast for the fast day, and now they can eat the rest of the day anyway. Again, a sort of a legal fiction to get around the fast of the firstborn. Firstborn people who don't go to that service theoretically should fast. I don't observe many of the minor fasts myself, so I don't know how often that's observed, but I just wanted to make you aware of that. It's called the siyum, the completion, that's the siyum, the completion of a tractate for firstborns so that they can eat during the day before the Passover night. And then, of course, the first night of Passover, and for everybody except Reform Jews, also the second night, is the Seder. And that's the special meal that has special symbolic foods, and we have a special book that we read from, the Haggadah, which tells the story of the Exodus from Egypt. And it's kind of a ritual meal, and it's supposed to be a big banquet. We eat pretty well, and we eat lots of food. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here because I'm hoping everybody will participate in the actual Seder we're going to do, and you will see how it's done, even though we'll be doing it on Zoom and not in person.
Nice.
Yeah. Question? So, so we'll talk about the Seder. If you want to know more about the Seder, Rabbi Fort did a wonderful explanation of the Seder meal and in her Lunch and Learn, which is also on our website. So you can see what she said about, how she was trying to encourage people who haven't done a Seder before, to give them some encouragement that, yes, you can do this too. Many Jews grow up in a home where the mother's been and the father have been doing the Seder for every year for decades, and the kids are sort of passive and haven't had to think about it. They just automatically go to their parents' home. And this year, because we're all in our own homes, many people are going to have to do a Seder for the first time, and so she's giving them some encouragement and tips about how, yes, you can do this too. So I encourage you to watch her video that talks about that. I also did a video about certain elements of the Haggadah, and I'll be doing another one this week, and Rabbi Ford will be doing one also. So that'll give you more idea about how to do a Seder, and then you'll get to see one. Oh, the chat. I'm missing the chat. Whoops. Hold on one second. Let me. Okay. So, are there anything in the chat that I should see? Do C-sections count for Siyum? Ah, good question. Wow. So there is another custom about firstborn boys that if they're the first child of their mother, in other words, the mother didn't have a girl first, the first child the mother had was this boy, and it was a natural birth, then there's a special ceremony called redemption of the firstborn, where you give some money to a priest to free your firstborn male from having to do priestly duties. And even though we don't have official priestly duties anymore, this custom still exists. It's another reason to celebrate the birth of a baby. And so the question that he's asking is, do we have the fast of the firstborn if it's a C-section? I'm going to say probably yes. No, that you don't. If it's a C-section, maybe you don't have to do that. It's a good question. I don't know. I'll try and find out. I see that Jennifer has posted Rabbi Fort's Lunch and Learn link on the chat thing, so feel free to click there and watch her explanation of how to do a Seder. Are there any other questions? Let me add one other thing here. Oh yes, what you'll need. Yeah, let's talk about that. So even though you're going to zoom into the Seder, you still should try and get all of the necessary symbolic foods that go on the Seder plate. There's a special plate that we have with all the symbolic foods on it. And since we're not all in the same room, everybody in their own home should have a Seder plate of their own, so that as we're doing it in our home, you can follow and do it in your home. Rabbi Ford again goes through the items that go on the Seder plate. You can also Google Seder plate and it'll tell you there's 5 or 6 items. You really only need the 5. It's a complicated explanation for why, but you only need 5 items. Many Seder plates have space for 6 items, so you can put 6 items if you want. But everybody should have their own Seder plate. Everybody should have their own bottle of kosher grape juice or kosher wine for the 4 cups that we'll need, and a box of matzah, and then some kind of food that you're going to eat. People in this class are eligible to go to our website, to log into our website and buy a pre-made Seder meal. The 2 options are both meat. So one is chicken and one is beef. If you're vegetarian, you probably want to make your own Seder meal. But if you want to, you can still buy the Seder plate, which has all the symbolic foods on it already set up. Probably it's a Fleischig Seder plate again. So if you're vegetarian and don't want to have the symbolic shank bone, then you might want to make your own Seder plate instead. But you have to be able to log in, and we tried to provide that everybody using your name and email address can log into our website. If you have a problem doing that, Jennifer Rosenzweig and Mindy Stern, our membership director, both said you can call them and they'll help you get logged in and registered so you can order the food if you'd like. We'd like to do that in the next few days so our kitchen knows how many of these to prepare. We have special recipes for kosher for Passover food. Some of them are in the handouts that you got. I gave you some easy recipes for kosher for Passover food. The main thing, the easiest thing to do is just avoid making foods that have any of those 5 grains in them. Potatoes are still okay. If you eat kitniyot, you can have corn on the cob or corn. You can use beans and rice. You can make all kinds of stuff that doesn't have the 5 grains in it. It's kosher for Passover, and you don't have to worry about it. It's only when you have cakes, cookies, and other things that usually have wheat, then you have to worry about kosher for Passover. Let me go back to the, it looks like there's some questions, right? I contacted the following and was successful to sign up and order. Yes, okay, good. Right, in Pettigrew, okay, good. Yeah, so those two people were Marcos and Eileen Pettigrew work in our kitchen. So I see in the comments you got logged in through them. That's great. Yeah, okay. So I see we're solving some of the Passover to go stuff. That's good. Where's the best place to get Passover food? Good question. So the major stores now that have kosher food, and those stores will also have kosher for Passover food. The main ones are the Randalls at Post Oak and West Belfort. The Kroger's at Post Oak and West Belfort also has some kosher food. And the H-E-B in the Meyerland Plaza has a huge selection of kosher food. So all three of those places are probably the best places to go for kosher for Passover food. Let me think. I did want to say something else. Let me just take a look at the list here. Recipes, questions. All right. Okay, so one other thing I want to say that maybe it hasn't been said about the Passover Seder. So the original Passover Seder meal was not as elaborate as it is today. When the temple still existed, the main thing about the Passover meal was the Passover lamb. Jews would go to Jerusalem, they'd sacrifice a lamb, it would be roasted, given back to them, and that was the centerpiece of the meal. They'd have all these other side dishes, including the bitter herbs and the matzah, but presumably plenty of other things to eat as well. And having this Passover lamb in front of you was so exciting that people would talk about, why are we eating this special food? And then you would talk about the Exodus from Egypt. There was no fixed formula for how you had to do that. It was just obvious that this was a special day because of the Passover lamb and all the extra special food you were eating. When the temple's destroyed and the Passover lamb is gone, you've lost like the major centerpiece of the meal. So now the question was, how do you make it a special dinner? How do you make it a special meal? And that's when the rabbis again jumped in and created a kind of more elaborate formula for how to conduct a Seder. So it's a little interesting today, many Christian groups who want to observe the holiday the way Jesus, because they want to get back to their roots, and Jesus was Jewish. So how did Jesus observe Passover? Let's do the same thing. But what they do is they end up following the ritual as it was designed after the temple was destroyed, right? With all the elaborate questions and answers and discussion in the Haggadah that we use today. But that didn't really exist in Jesus' time. So they're not really celebrating the way Jesus celebrated. They're celebrating the way Jews celebrate now. Not that that's a problem. I'm just pointing that out. So when the rabbis decided to create this elaborate ceremony, they were living in a particular cultural environment when they did it. And the cultural environment was the Greco-Roman world. So what they did was they looked at what the Greco-Romans did when they had a big feast, and they said, okay, we're going to take elements of that and use that to elaborate this Passover meal. And so what was the Greco-Roman feast like? You can read Plato's Symposium, one of the dialogues of Plato. A symposium was a classic Greco-Roman feast that the aristocrats in that world used to host. They would invite a lot of guests over to their home, and they'd eat all these fancy delicacies and all kinds of fancy foods. And then they would discuss over the course of the meal some topic of philosophy or poetry or literature or history or politics. Sometimes they'd invite over a local politician or a local philosopher, and he would pontificate about what's going on in the world, and it would create a discussion. And that was called a symposium. The original symposium was over an elaborate banquet. So the rabbis saw that, and they said, oh, that's kind of like what we want to do. So they took elements from the symposium and they used it to create this elaborate meal that we eat. And so what are the elements of it? Various opportunities to drink wine, because the Greek and Roman culture, they drank a lot of wine at these things. People would ask questions and they'd answer questions and they'd create discussion. They had special festival meal dishes that they would eat at the meal. And and they would be reclining. That's the other thing. In the old days in the Greco-Roman world, when you ate in the dining room, you didn't have a dining room table that people sat in chairs at. They had sofas that people reclined on, and the dining room had three sides and was open in the middle. And the servants would come in the middle and serve each of the guests who were reclining around the sides. So the idea of reclining during the Passover Seder came again from the Greco-Roman world. Having hors d'oeuvres before the meal begins, that comes from the Greco-Roman world. The Western world still does that at formal banquets. We always have salad first, or if you're going to a wedding, there's the hors d'oeuvres before you sit down at the formal banquet. That all comes from the Greco-Roman world, and that also got incorporated into the Passover Seder. Are there other questions? Both are pretty well stocked. Okay, good. So Randall's and HEB are pretty well stocked. Right. Okay. Any other questions that I haven't answered yet? So hopefully this has been kind of helpful to sort of provide an overview for Passover and its importance. Again, observing the Seder is really, really important. That's the most celebrated custom, certainly in the home in the Jewish world today. Even secular Jews do a Seder. So I hope you'll participate in our Zoom Seder this year. We would have provided home hospitality in a normal situation, but that's not going to happen this year. So, so we're doing this instead. Are there any other questions? Okay. So with that, I wish you a happy Passover. It's traditional to wish people a kosher Passover because of the special laws of keeping kosher. So you should have a happy and kosher Passover, despite the current situation. As I've discussed, many of us have discussed this time, this year particularly, when we're forced to be separate in our own homes, having a ritual like this where we can come together, even if only over the Ethernet, is really important. You know, there are so many parallels from the Passover story to what we're experiencing today that I think it's really a powerful moment for us, and an important reason for us to celebrate Passover. One of those things is that the night before the Passover, the angel of death was passing over the Jewish homes when it was wreaking havoc in the Egyptian world. We have our own coronavirus that's wreaking havoc, sadly, in our world. And this is kind of like a parallel for us. We're not going to put blood on the doorposts of our house. We have mezuzahs on our doorposts instead. But we will celebrate the Passover and hope that God not only passes over our houses, or God, this virus passes over our houses, but passes over the houses of everyone in the city of Houston and in the world. We soon will find a cure for this, and we'll be safe and not have to worry about this disease in the future. Any other questions? Okay, yeah, please, Jennifer Rosenzweig has posted in the comments that you can contact her if you have any trouble getting what you need on the website. So please do that. All right, I went a little over time. I hope you all have a good Passover, and I look forward to celebrating with you on Zoom the first night of Passover, and that you have a safe and healthy Passover this year. And we'll see you in this class session in a couple of weeks. Happy Passover.